I never thought that betrayal could arrive dressed in such ordinary silence. It was a quiet Saturday afternoon. I stood in the laundry room, folding freshly dried towels, humming the same love song my mother used to sing when she ironed. The faint scent of lavender fabric softener clung to my fingers, and the steady rhythm of the folding almost lulled me into forgetting how heavy my life had felt lately. Then the phone rang. My son Adrian's name lit up the screen. He rarely called in the middle of the day, and something in my chest tightened before I even answered. "Mom," he said, urgency dripping through the line, "is your husband at home?" I froze. My eyes drifted to the closed bathroom door upstairs. I could hear the shower running, the pipes rattling faintly through the walls. "Yes," I replied, frowning, "he's in the shower." Adrian paused, and I could hear him exhale sharply. "No, he's not. I just saw him check into my hotel, with another woman." The folded towel slipped from my hands and fell to the floor. My knees weakened, and I leaned against the washing machine, the cool metal grounding me. "A woman?" I whispered, though the words scraped my throat like broken glass. "She looked young," he said, his voice heavy with anger. "Too young to be with Dad." The hum of the dryer behind me felt like thunder in my ears. I pressed my palm to the warm towel pile, desperate to steady my breath, but a chill ran through me, colder than any winter wind. And then, I heard footsteps behind me. The bathroom door was open. The water had stopped. I turned slowly, the weight of 40 years pressing on my shoulders, and saw him. My husband, Charles. Hair damp, shirt buttoned crisp, shoes polished. He smelled faintly of his cedar cologne. Not the scent of someone who had just showered at home. For a heartbeat, the air stood still. Then his eyes met mine, unreadable, calm, as if nothing at all was wrong. And in that suspended silence, I felt it. The first crack in the world I had built, the one I thought would never break. I turned around slowly, my heart hammering so hard it made my ears ring. There he was, Charles, standing in the doorway like nothing had happened. His hair was damp, but not wet enough to match the sound of the shower that had been running upstairs. He wore a fresh button-down shirt, tucked neatly into pressed trousers, and the faint gleam of aftershave floated toward me. That scent, cedar and spice, used to make me feel safe. Now it burned my throat. "I thought you were upstairs," I whispered, my voice trembling, my hands still pressing into the warmth of the folded towels. "I just got back," he said smoothly, adjusting his cufflinks as though we were discussing the weather. My fingers tightened around the edge of a towel, the terry cloth biting into my palm. Adrian's words echoed in my head. "I just saw him check into my hotel, with another woman." My son had no reason to lie. And yet here stood Charles, feigning calm, as though the truth weren't written all over him. The faint drip of water still echoed from the bathroom, mocking me. He hadn't been in there. He hadn't been home. Back from where? I asked, forcing my tone to steady. He gave me a half smile, that familiar, dismissive shrug. "Out. Needed some air." Air. That was his answer. As if I were supposed to ignore the hours he'd been gone, the locked desk drawer, the way he never left his phone unattended anymore. My stomach twisted, but I bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted copper. He walked past me then, brushing against my shoulder with the faintest touch. That used to be comforting. Now it felt like intrusion. I inhaled sharply, catching the mingled scents of starch and perfume, something floral that wasn't mine. Was I losing my mind? Was I inventing shadows out of fear? But no. Adrian's voice had been too clear, too sharp. My son had seen what I couldn't. I looked down at the towel in my hands. My fingers had left small creases in the soft fabric. The neat folds I had so carefully smoothed out were ruined. Just like the life I thought I still had. And Charles, humming softly as he went to pour himself a drink, didn't even notice. Charles and I had been married for 20 years. I was just 20 when we met, a college girl with big dreams and no real plan. He was already established, confident, steady, a man who seemed to know exactly where he was going. At first, I mistook that certainty for safety. By 20, I was wearing his ring. By 22, I was carrying our son. We raised Adrian together, or at least I thought we did. I stayed home in those early years, while Charles worked long hours, always in pressed suits, always smelling faintly of cedar cologne and ambition. I convinced myself that his distance was just tiredness, the price of stability. He wasn't cruel, not then. Just absent. But over time, absence turns into silence, and silence hardens into walls. I learned to smooth the edges of our life, to cover the cracks. I made the house beautiful. I cooked meals that smelled of rosemary and garlic, filling the rooms with warmth. I folded laundry with precision, tucking the corners in just so, as if neat stacks could hold our family together. Lately, though, something had shifted. His phone, always face down. His walks, which stretched into hours. The way he laughed at texts I couldn't see. And then, the sudden bursts of charm. Flowers on a Tuesday. Compliments that sounded rehearsed. Touches that lingered too long, not out of love, but guilt. I told myself not to notice. To be grateful. To keep the peace. After all, wasn't that what women my age were supposed to do? Swallow the bitterness, smooth the wrinkles, keep folding until the pile was gone? But Adrian's call had split the fabric wide open. I kept seeing it in my mind, my son's face when he realized his father was not the man he thought he was. The pain in his voice when he told me. For years, I had been protecting Charles's dignity. But now, I realized, I might need to protect myself, and my son, from him. The lavender scent clung stubbornly to my blouse as I sat down, pressing my hands into my lap to stop their trembling. I couldn't deny it anymore. This wasn't just distance. This was betrayal. And now, I had no choice but to look it straight in the eye. That night, after the house had gone still and the shadows stretched long across the living room walls, I called Adrian back. My voice shook as I whispered into the phone, but not from fear anymore. From clarity. She was young, Mom, Adrian said, his voice low and steady, though I could hear the anger burning underneath. My age. Maybe younger. They were holding hands, laughing like teenagers. The image carved into my chest like a knife. A 45-year-old man parading around with a woman who could have been my son's older sister. I swallowed, tasting bitterness. I believe you, I told him. I had to say it twice because my voice cracked. I just needed to see his face when I asked. And now I have. There was silence on the other end, then Adrian asked carefully, "Do you want me to do anything?" His question hung in the air like smoke. Do something. For a moment, I almost said no. Almost convinced myself I should just endure, fold the towels, and keep humming my mother's song. But that had been the old me, the woman who smoothed every wrinkle so no one would see the creases. Yes, I said finally, pressing my palm against the cool ceramic of the lamp beside me. I want to know if they check in again. I could almost hear him nodding. Consider it done. After I hung up, I sat there in the quiet, the faint scent of chamomile tea lingering from the cup I had abandoned hours before. My hands smoothed the hem of my blouse again and again, a nervous gesture I couldn't seem to stop. But beneath the trembling, a new current had started to flow. I needed proof, real proof, not just suspicion, not just Adrian's word, though I trusted my son more than anyone. If Charles thought he could gaslight me into doubting myself, he was mistaken. I thought of the way he looked earlier, so composed, so dismissive, as if my questions were a minor inconvenience. He thought I would keep folding the towels, keep setting the table, keep playing the dutiful wife. He didn't realize that his arrogance had given me a gift. The gift of anger. And with it, clarity. I stood up, gathering the blanket from the armchair where I always sat. It smelled faintly of fabric softener, mixed with the musk of years of use. It had warmed me through so many winters, through nights when Charles stayed late at work. Now it felt like armor. I wrapped it around my shoulders and whispered to myself, no more trusting blindly. The next morning, Charles was cheerful, almost overly so. He made coffee, humming off key, pretending life was perfectly normal. I sipped mine slowly, noting how bitter it tasted. His shirt smelled freshly laundered, but faintly, just faintly, of perfume that wasn't mine. I smiled back at him. Not because I believed him, but because he didn't know I had begun to plan. And while he smoothed his cuffs and checked his reflection in the window, I smoothed the edge of my blanket and promised myself one thing. If he wanted to play this game, I'd play it better. I began watching Charles the way a hunter watches the woods, quietly, patiently, with every sense sharpened. At first, it was small things. He still left for his walks, claiming he needed to clear his head, but now I noted the time, the shoes, the jacket, the scent of cologne he dabbed on his collar. He never went anywhere without cologne anymore. Not for me, certainly. For her. The first time I caught him checking his watch, lingering by the mirror before slipping out, I felt the sting of humiliation. But I bit my lip, smoothed the hem of my blouse, and said nothing. Instead, I wrote it down in a notebook I kept tucked inside an old recipe binder. Dates, times, details. His lies became my evidence. And his phone, that glowing little traitor. He never took it into the bathroom anymore, not like before. I'd hear the shower running upstairs, the water drumming, and his phone sitting silent on the counter, face down, locked tight. The old Charles would have left it anywhere, open to the world. But this Charles? He guarded it like a man clutching contraband. Then came the locked drawer in his desk. A drawer that had always held nothing more than tax forms and expired pens. I tried the old keys, the ones hanging on the kitchen hook, none fit. The sound of metal scraping uselessly in the lock made my stomach twist. What was he hiding in there? And yet, in the middle of this tightening secrecy, he started trying harder. Flowers appeared on the dining table, cheap carnations from the grocery store, their fragrance faint and almost sour compared to the roses he used to buy in our early days. He made small talk about the weather, about a news story he barely skimmed, about Adrian's classes. He laughed too quickly, too loudly, as though to cover some silence he feared would expose him. He even cooked dinner once, burnt chicken, over salted potatoes, the kitchen reeking of charred oil. I ate every bite, smiling politely, my tongue numb from the salt, because I knew it wasn't for me. It was for him, his guilty conscience demanding applause. I realized then that Charles wasn't just lying to me. He was performing for me. He sensed the shift in the air, the way I no longer asked where he was, no longer leaned toward him. He mistook my quiet for ignorance. But ignorance is not the same as silence. I learned to play along. I accepted the carnations, smoothed the wrinkled petals with my fingers. I tasted the burnt potatoes, drinking extra water to wash them down. I nodded at his jokes, humming softly the way I used to when folding towels, the melody of a woman who seemed too distracted to notice. And all the while, my notebook grew heavier with truth. Every scent of cologne, every locked drawer, every cheap flower became another thread in the web I was weaving. He thought he was playing me. But he didn't realize I had stopped being his audience. I was becoming his witness. I needed someone outside the house. Someone who knew me before Charles, who could see through the fog of doubt he kept trying to wrap around me. So I called Margie. Margie and I had been friends since we were girls, back when we'd sit cross-legged on her bedroom floor, painting our nails and planning impossible futures. She was the one who always told me the truth, even when it stung. Especially when it stung. We met at the cafe on Maple Street, the one that always smelled of strong coffee and cinnamon rolls. The bell above the door jingled as I walked in, and for a moment I felt like I was 16 again, seeking refuge from a storm. Margie took one look at me, at the tight smile I'd pasted on, and shook her head. "Oh, honey," she said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. Her palm was warm, her grip firm, grounding me. "You don't have to say a word. I can see it all over your face." I laughed, though it came out more like a sob. "It's Charles. I think he's seeing someone." Her eyes narrowed, sharp as glass. "You don't think. You know. Don't let him make you second-guess your own gut." I stirred my coffee, watching the cream swirl into dark spirals. "Adrian saw him. At the hotel. With a girl." She was young, Margie. My son had to be the one to tell me. The bitterness in my throat was worse than the coffee's bite. Margie sat back, folding her arms, the corner of her mouth twisting. If you want to catch a rat, you need cheese. Her sarcasm startled a laugh out of me. It felt strange, laughing through tears, like a woman caught in a storm without an umbrella. I think I already set the trap, I said, though my voice wavered. She leaned forward again, lowering her voice. Listen to me. Don't just wait around for him to trip over himself. Talk to a lawyer. Quietly. Protect yourself before he drains you dry. I blinked at her. A lawyer. Divorce had been a word I tucked away for other women, for television dramas, for neighbors we whispered about. Not for me. Not after 2 decades, not after a son, a house, a life built brick by brick. But Margie's words hung in the cinnamon-scented air like prophecy. Protect yourself. The cafe felt suddenly too warm, the wool of my sweater itching against my skin. I pressed my palm to my blouse hem, smoothing it again and again, as if emotion could keep me steady. I don't even know where to start, I admitted. Margie gave me that look, the one that had carried me through heartbreaks and childbirth and funerals. You start by remembering who you are. You're not some naive little girl anymore. You're a woman with something to lose, and the power to keep it. I stared into my coffee cup, the steam blurring my reflection. She was right. If Charles was reckless enough to betray me, he was reckless enough to ruin me financially. When we left the cafe, the autumn air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of fallen leaves. I wrapped my scarf tighter, the knit wool brushing against my cheek, and made a silent vow. If Margie was right, and she usually was, this wasn't just about love anymore. It was about survival. The following week, I did something I never thought I would. I called a lawyer. Not one of the big downtown types with marble offices and stiff suits. No, I went to Mrs. Delgado, a woman I'd met years ago through Margie. She was practical, sharp, and had a reputation for never missing a detail. Her office smelled faintly of lemon polish and old books, the kind of place where secrets felt both safe and dangerous at once. I sat across from her desk, smoothing the hem of my blouse until the fabric was warm under my palms. My voice was steady when I said, I think my husband is preparing to leave me. But not before he takes everything we've built. Mrs. Delgado adjusted her glasses, her eyes narrowing in that way that made me feel both seen and dissected. Do you have proof? I pulled out my notebook, the one tucked inside my recipe binder. Dates, times, lies. The shadows of Charles's movements written in my hand. I didn't realize until that moment how heavy it had become, how much ink I had poured into those pages. She turned each page slowly, nodding. Good. Very good. We'll need more. Paperwork. Financials. Anything with his signature. Her words were calm, clinical. To her, this was routine. To me, it was war. Over the next days, I began moving like a shadow through my own house. While Charles showered, I checked the mail. While he left for his walks, I snapped photos of bank statements, credit card bills, tax forms. My phone became a vault of evidence, tucked into folders he would never see. Adrian helped too. One evening, he slipped me a copy of the hotel's guest ledger. She used a fake name, he whispered, his jaw tight with fury. But security cameras don't lie. He placed a photo in my hand. Blurry, but unmistakable. Charles holding hands with a woman, her hair glossy and dark, her smile bright with youth. I stared at that picture until my vision blurred. She couldn't have been more than 31. Younger than me by almost a decade. Young enough to still believe in promises, too foolish to see the rot beneath Charles's polished surface. I tucked the photo into my notebook. My hands trembled, but not from weakness. From resolve. I began shifting small amounts of money into my own savings account. Updating my will. Mrs. Delgado guided me through it all with precision, her pen scratching across documents like a blade cutting through rope. Each signature was a tether loosened, each notarized page a piece of armor. Charles had no idea. He still hummed in the mornings, still brought home carnations that wilted in less than a week, still tried to make small talk as if nothing were wrong. I let him. I smiled. I even pressed the carnations into a vase, inhaling their faint, sour scent. Because what he didn't know was that I was no longer the woman who folded laundry in blind faith. I was preparing, quietly, calmly, and soon, the mask he wore would begin to crack. 3 weeks into my quiet preparations, I thought I had regained some control. The accounts were moving into safer hands. The notebook was filling with evidence. I even started sleeping a little better, wrapping myself in my old knit blanket, the one that smelled faintly of lavender detergent and years of comfort, as though it could shield me from his lies. But betrayal has a way of showing up in the mail. One crisp October morning, I pulled a thick envelope from the mailbox. The return address was the bank. My stomach tightened. I hadn't requested anything. I carried it inside, the paper stiff in my hands, and sat at the kitchen table. The faint aroma of last night's chamomile tea still lingered in the air as I slit the envelope open. Refinance agreement. Our house. Signed by Charles. Without me. I gripped the pages so hard my knuckles turned white. My name was absent, erased as though I had never stood in this house, never painted its walls, never brought our son home through its door. When Charles came back from his so-called walk, I was waiting at the kitchen table. The refinance papers spread before me like evidence at a trial. He breezed in with that same cedar cologne trailing him, humming faintly, as though life were nothing but sunshine and errands. "What is this?" I asked, my voice low, controlled. He barely glanced at the papers. "Oh, that. It was a good deal. Lower interest. You wouldn't understand the paperwork." The casual dismissal, the arrogance, made my hands shake. "You signed without me. This is our home. My family's home." He poured himself a glass of water, as if we were discussing groceries. "Don't be dramatic. It's just numbers. It's not like you ever cared about that stuff." The words sliced deeper than I expected. For years, I had let him handle the finances, trusting, smoothing, folding away my doubts like laundry. And now he was using that trust as a weapon. I pressed my hand flat against the table, the wood cool beneath my palm, to steady myself. "You tried to push me out," I whispered. "You're not just cheating on me, you're erasing me." For the first time, he looked at me. Really looked. And there was no apology in his eyes. Only irritation, like a man annoyed that his plan had been uncovered too soon. He shrugged. "It's just business." I almost laughed then, a sharp, bitter laugh that scraped my throat. Business. As if a marriage of 20 years, a home built room by room, a son raised with both our names, could be reduced to a ledger line. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in the living room wrapped in my blanket, the house eerily quiet except for the ticking of the clock. I thought of my grandmother's locket, tucked away in my jewelry box upstairs, a gift passed down through women who had all endured their own storms. I traced its outline in my mind and promised myself, I would not be erased. If Charles wanted a war of paperwork and lies, then I would meet him there. And unlike him, I had nothing left to lose by telling the truth. The morning after I discovered the refinance papers, I called Mrs. Delgado before the sun was fully up. My voice was calm, but my hands shook as I held the phone. "He refinanced the house without me," I said. "He's trying to erase me from my own life." She didn't sound surprised. "Then we move faster. Come into the office today." By noon, I sat at her desk again, the smell of lemon polish sharp in the air. She slid documents across the surface, her nails tapping lightly on each page. "We'll freeze all joint accounts immediately. That will stop him from moving money without your consent." I signed with a steady hand. Each stroke of the pen felt like stitching a wound. "Second," she continued, "we'll revoke the power of attorney you granted him years ago. Quietly. He won't even know until it's too late." I swallowed hard. I had forgotten I'd given him that power, back when trust came as easily as breathing. I signed the revocation with extra pressure, the pen biting into the paper. "Third," she said, "we'll change the deed to reflect your premarital ownership. You inherited the house before you married him. That matters. The words lifted something heavy off my chest. For the first time since Adrian's phone call, I felt like I had a piece of ground beneath my feet again. When I left the office, the autumn air smelled faintly of wood smoke and damp leaves. I wrapped my scarf tighter and clutched my folder of documents to my chest like a shield. That evening, Charles came home with carnations again, wilting at the edges, their sweet, sickly scent filling the kitchen. He set them on the counter, smiling as though nothing had changed. I smiled back. I even filled a vase, trimming the stems, letting the petals brush my fingertips. He didn't notice that I locked my desk drawer afterward. He didn't notice that I began keeping my jewelry box in Adrian's room when he wasn't home. He didn't notice that when I smoothed my blouse hem, it wasn't nerves anymore, it was habit, ritual, preparation. He thought he still held the strings. But I had cut them. That night, I slept more soundly than I had in months. Wrapped in my old blanket, the faint lavender scent soothing me, I closed my eyes without the usual dread clawing at my chest. For a few precious hours, I dreamed of nothing. No betrayal, no refinances, just silence. But silence is a fragile gift. And deep down, I knew it wouldn't last. The fragile calm shattered one evening with a single phone call. I was in the kitchen, the smell of roasted garlic and rosemary filling the air as I stirred a pot of soup. My hands moved automatically, the wooden spoon circling, while my mind rested in that rare place of quiet. Adrian's number lit up my phone. "Mom," he said, voice clipped. She came back. Same girl. Same room. My stomach dropped, the spoon slipping from my fingers and clattering against the pot. The soup hissed and bubbled, the sound suddenly too loud. "Are you sure?" I whispered, gripping the counter edge, the cool granite biting into my palms. "I'm sure. But that's not all." His breath came hard through the line. I followed them, just to see. I held my breath, the smell of garlic turning sour in my nose. "They didn't go to dinner," Adrian continued. "They drove to a bank. Stayed there almost an hour." My knees weakened, and I slid into a chair, the wooden seat creaking beneath me. "A bank?" "Yes. And, Mom." He hesitated, then pushed the words out. "She's not just some fling. She's a real estate agent. I saw her card when she pulled it out of her purse. They're buying something. A condo. Together." The kitchen spun around me. The rosemary scent, once comforting, now choked me. I pressed my hand against the table, my fingers trembling against the grain of the wood. This wasn't a simple affair. This wasn't a midlife lapse, a moment of weakness. This was strategy, a plan, a whole new life built behind my back. I could picture them, Charles in his pressed shirt, her with that glossy hair, smiling at him over bank forms, dreaming of a future funded by my years of work, my sacrifices, my home. It wasn't just betrayal of the heart. It was theft. I closed my eyes and saw Adrian as a boy, his small hand clutching mine as we walked him into kindergarten, his lunchbox swinging at his side. Every sacrifice I'd made had been for him, for us, for this family. And now Charles was ready to hand it over to a woman barely older than my son. When I opened my eyes, the soup was bubbling over, steam clouding the kitchen windows. I didn't move. I just sat there, my hands folded tightly in my lap, smoothing my blouse hem again and again. Not from nerves this time. From fury. "Mom?" Adrian's voice broke through, softer now. "What do you want me to do?" I inhaled, the scent of burnt garlic sharp and bitter. "Nothing more," I said slowly. "You've already given me the truth. And now, I know what I'm dealing with." When we hung up, I poured the soup down the drain, the steam rising like smoke from a fire. Then I wrapped myself in my blanket, pressing the fabric to my face, breathing in its faint lavender scent to keep from drowning in rage. Charles wasn't just betraying me. He was plotting to erase me, to replace me, to steal the very ground I stood on. But he didn't know who he was dealing with anymore. Something snapped in me that night. For weeks, I had been living like a shadow in my own house, quiet, careful, pretending not to see. But Adrian's call lit a fire I couldn't ignore. This wasn't just adultery. This was theft. A long con. A man who thought he could rewrite the story of my life while I stood by, too meek, too trusting, too good to fight back. I sat in the living room, the house dark except for the glow of a single lamp. The blanket was wrapped around my shoulders, its familiar lavender scent rising as I clutched it tighter. My fingers traced the edges, smoothing them, steadying myself. Charles thought he knew me. Thought I was the same woman who let him dismiss my questions with a shrug, who smoothed the tablecloth while swallowing her doubts. But he had mistaken endurance for weakness. And now, he had underestimated me for the last time. I pictured him at the bank with her, their heads bent together over documents, her hand brushing his arm, her youth shining like a weapon. He thought he was starting fresh, while I was meant to fade quietly into the background. But I had been preparing. Quietly, patiently, documenting, protecting, planning. I wasn't his fool. Not anymore. The clock ticked steadily in the silence, each beat like a drum in my chest. I realized then that I wasn't afraid of losing him. I was afraid of losing myself, of letting him strip me of my dignity and my future. I straightened in my chair, the blanket sliding off my shoulders. My hands stopped trembling. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt the weight of my own strength settle back into me. If Charles wanted to play at building a new life with her, let him. Because I was about to dismantle the one he thought he still controlled. The next morning, I called Adrian and asked him to meet me at Mrs. Delgado's office. My voice was calm, but inside I felt like a violin string pulled to breaking. When we arrived, Mrs. Delgado spread the documents across her desk, my notebook, the hotel ledger, the blurry photo, the refinance papers. The lemon polish scent clung to the air as though reminding me, here, things are kept clean. Adrian leaned forward, his jaw tight. We can't let him get away with this, Mom. Mrs. Delgado nodded. We'll build a timeline. Dates, receipts, everything. The more detailed, the harder it is for him to deny. I opened my notebook, smoothing the pages flat. Each line I'd written in my careful handwriting suddenly looked like testimony. But I wanted more than just paper. I wanted the truth in full light. So I hired a private investigator, a man named Carver, recommended by Delgado. He smelled faintly of tobacco and wore a coat that looked older than me, but his eyes were sharp. Within a week, Carver delivered what I hadn't dared to hope for. The woman wasn't just a fling, and she wasn't new at this. She had done it before, twice. 2 other men, both middle-aged, both left gutted in divorces where she'd helped siphon assets. Adrian swore under his breath when Carver laid out the file, photos and all. She's a predator. I pressed my fingertips to the papers, the texture rough beneath my skin. My heart raced, but not with fear, with vindication. Charles wasn't just betraying me. He had walked straight into a trap, and he didn't even know it. I folded the file and tucked it under my arm. For years, I had been the quiet one, the peacekeeper, the woman smoothing blouses and tablecloths, humming lullabies while everyone else made the noise. But silence, I had learned, could also be a weapon. And I was ready to use it. I planned the dinner carefully, the way I used to plan Adrian's birthday parties, down to the smallest detail. Only this time, the celebration would be for the truth. I set the table with the good china, the ivory plates trimmed in gold. The smell of roasted chicken and thyme filled the house, masking the bitterness in my chest. I lit candles, their flames flickering shadows across the walls. To anyone else, it looked like a family gathering. To me, it was a trial. Adrian arrived first, his face tight but steady. My daughters followed, chattering about work and school, their voices bright, unaware of the storm about to break. Charles sat at the head of the table, smug, sipping wine like a king entertaining his court. For the first half hour, I let him play his role. He asked the children about their classes, complimented the food, even reached for my hand once, his fingers cool and insincere. I let him. I smiled. I passed the potatoes. The performance was almost convincing. Then Adrian cleared his throat. He pulled a folder from his bag and laid it on the table with a soft thud that silenced the room. "I think," he said evenly, "we should all look at what Dad's been doing." The candles flickered as though the air itself held its breath. Charles froze, the wineglass halfway to his lips. His face drained of color. My daughters looked from Adrian to me, their forks suspended. Adrian spread the photos across the table, the hotel camera stills, the guest ledger, the bank documents. The woman's glossy hair, her hand entwined with his. The condo forms with his signature scrawled bold across them. My daughters gasped, their hands flying to their mouths. One whispered, "Dad?" Charles opened his mouth, but no words came out. His eyes darted to me, searching for rescue, for the silent wife who always covered his tracks. But I just sat there, my hands folded in my lap, smoothing the hem of my blouse with steady fingers. I watched him squirm, pale and exposed under the glow of candlelight. And for the first time in 2 decades, I felt no obligation to save him. The silence around the table stretched so long I could hear the faint hiss of the candles, the tick of the clock in the hallway. Then Charles slammed his hand against the table, rattling the silverware. "You had me followed?" he roared, his face mottled red. "How dare you?" The children flinched. My youngest daughter's eyes welled with tears. Adrian stayed stone-faced, his jaw set like granite. I rose slowly from my chair, the weight of 20 years settling into my spine, but my voice was calm, cold, even. "No, Charles. You dared. You dared to betray me. To betray our family. To throw away everything we built." He turned to the children, desperate. "This is all a misunderstanding. She's twisting things. You know how your mother exaggerates," but his words faltered when Adrian slid another document across the table. The bank statement. The secret withdrawals. The credit card charges he hadn't meant anyone to find. My daughters leaned forward, their faces pale in the candlelight. "Dad," one whispered, her voice breaking. Charles stammered, It's not what it looks like." I pulled the final envelope from my bag and laid it beside the evidence. My fingers were steady now, smoothing the flap closed before I slid it toward him. "The fake condo account. The forged signatures. The proof that you planned to siphon everything we worked for into a life with her." The words hung heavy in the air, heavier than the smell of roasted chicken that now made me sick. Charles's mouth opened, closed, opened again. But there were no words left to save him. His lies had dried up. I straightened my shoulders, smoothing the fabric of my blouse one last time. My children's eyes were on me now, searching for strength. And I gave it to them, not with raised voices or slammed fists, but with the unshakable calm of a woman who has finally stopped being silent. I reached into my bag one last time and drew out a thick envelope. I slid it across the table toward Charles, the paper whispering against the linen cloth. He stared at it, his hand hovering as though it might burn him. "What's this?" he asked, his voice cracking. I met his eyes steadily. "It's over, Charles. Divorce papers." The color drained from his face. He fumbled the envelope open, scanning the letter from Mrs. Delgado, the legal stamp bright and merciless at the top. His lips moved, but no sound came. "The house?" I said, my tone calm, almost conversational. "Mine. I inherited it before we married." "The accounts?" "Locked." "The power of attorney you once held?" "Revoked." The children sat frozen, their eyes wide, as though they were watching a play where the villain had finally been unmasked. Charles's composure cracked. He dropped the papers onto the table, clutching his head in his hands. "Please," he whispered. Then louder, frantic, "Please, it didn't mean anything. She didn't mean anything." I almost laughed at the absurdity. Didn't mean anything. A man doesn't refinance a house, open secret accounts, and plan a condo with a woman who means nothing. "It meant enough," I said firmly, "for you to plan a new life without me. To erase me. To betray your children." Tears streaked his face now, and his hands trembled as he reached toward me. "I can fix this. Just give me another chance." I stepped back, smoothing the hem of my blouse, steady as stone. "No, you don't get another chance. Not after this." The silence that followed was sharper than his shouting, heavier than his begging. It was the silence of an ending. For the first time in years, I didn't feel erased. I felt written back into my own story. And Charles? He was just a footnote. Charles was gone within a week. He packed in silence, his face drawn, his movements stiff. No grand speeches, no apologies that could undo the truth. Just the sound of drawers opening, the faint rustle of shirts pulled from hangers, the sharp zip of suitcases. I watched from the doorway, arms crossed, the faint lavender scent of my blanket still clinging to my skin. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I let the silence say everything. The woman disappeared soon after. Rumors reached me through Adrian. She had lent Charles money, and when the condo deal collapsed, she turned on him. Sued him for fraud, even. It almost made me laugh. The predator devoured by her own trap. Karma, I thought, doesn't always take its time. By November, the house was mine alone. The children came home for Thanksgiving, their voices filling the rooms with laughter that had been absent for far too long. The air smelled of roasting turkey and pumpkin pie, rich and warm, instead of tension and lies. I set the table with the same ivory china we'd used at that fateful dinner, but this time the light felt different, gentler, freer. My daughters teased each other, Adrian carved the turkey with exaggerated flair, and I poured wine without glancing at an empty chair. For the first time in 20 years, I felt peace. Not the fragile, fearful peace of pretending everything was fine, but the solid kind that settles deep into the bones. After dinner, I sat in the living room, wrapped in my old blanket, a cup of chamomile tea warming my hands. The house hummed with quiet contentment, the tick of the clock, the faint clatter of dishes being washed, the low murmur of my children's voices. The silence no longer frightened me. It healed me, and as I smoothed the edge of the blanket between my fingers, I realized I hadn't just survived Charles's betrayal. I had reclaimed myself. I am 40 years old. Old enough to know that love can build you up, and just as easily, it can strip you bare. If you think betrayal belongs only to the young, you're wrong. It finds us at any age. But if you think women like me are powerless, well, that's where you're very wrong. I trusted my gut. I kept my records. I protected my peace. And when the man I once believed in tried to erase me, I wrote myself back. Not with rage, not with violence, but with dignity. With quiet persistence. With the kind of strength that grows only after years of smoothing hems, folding laundry, holding families together. Charles lost me, and more than that, he lost the right to define my life. And as I sit here now, wrapped in my lavender-scented blanket, I know this much. No one, not even someone you've shared a bed with for decades, has the right to steal your story. I reclaimed mine, and I made it stronger.